So yeah, like Rachel already said, my name is Aoife O'Malley and I'm the manager of Barnahus West in Ireland. I suppose it's just been amazing. I'm just so delighted to be invited here today, and it's been amazing to see the evolution of the Barnahus in Scotland. And I suppose we've so many cultural similarities that it's brilliant to see how possible it is in Ireland and the UK to get this model over the line, because I suppose we do things a little bit more differently, but it's definitely possible, so it's great. So you'll see, I suppose there, that's a photo of our reception in Barnahus West, a very hard-won premises that took a lot of blood, sweat and tears to get that over the line, but we're so delighted with it and we're so proud of the place. It's largely designed by children and young people, so there's lots of elements in the place that I suppose really came directly from the children and young people in Barnahus, and yeah, we're just really, really proud of it. And you'll notice as well, this was our logo up there in the top left-hand corner. So you'll often see the Barnahus logo across European countries, and they'll have the house with the 4 rooms, but the young people that we consulted with were very keen to make it a jigsaw, because they really wanted to show the integration of the 4 rooms and how we actually work together on things. And they were also very keen for us to have a shared front door. So the whole, I suppose, the theme of our Barnahus in Ireland is really making sure that from that front door there is sharing of information for children and young people, and that we collaborate as an interagency group around that. So that's where our little jigsaw came from. Just a little bit about my role, I suppose. I am primarily responsible for implementation of the Barnahus model in the West, which, like I said, is the pilot site, and we've been operational since 2020 in Ireland. And I'm also, I suppose, I'm responsible for interagency working in general, so really making sure that everybody talks to each other. And I'm also the clinical lead for the therapy team. So for me, I think it's been very important having somebody in my role that has that kind of trauma-informed therapy background and has worked directly with trauma populations and understands how trauma affects not only the children and families that we work with, but communities, policymakers, systems, professionals, everybody really that's affected by this trauma. So I'll just, I suppose, what I want to cover today really is the who, what, when, where, why of Barnahus in Ireland, how we implemented things in the West. I'm going to assume that people have a certain amount of knowledge of the Barnahus model itself, so I'm not going to talk specifically about the model of Barnahus, but I'll talk about how we've applied the model of Barnahus in an Irish context. I hope that makes sense. And just, I suppose, to really make the point that we are trying to use the Barnahus as a model of practice. We're not a new service and we're not a new agency that we're trying to set up. We're applying the model of practice to existing agencies and services in Ireland for children, and that's a theme that you'll see throughout my presentation today. So there's a little poster that we have, and it just kind of shows what was there before Barnahus and what we hope to implement with Barnahus. So typical presentation to the Barnahus in Galway is a 15-year-old female, and she might disclose that she was sexually abused to say her teacher. And what would have happened maybe in the past is that the teacher has brought the child to the principal as the designated liaison person, and the principal might ask the child again what happened to them. And they might call a social worker from Tusla, which is the Child and Family Agency in Ireland, and the social worker might come and ask the child what happened to them. The social worker might then bring the child to a hospital for a forensic medical examination. Not only will the child again possibly be asked what happened to them, they're in a hospital. So if you think, I suppose, of the impact of the environment on a child, the message that child might be getting is that there's something wrong with them. They might then be brought to, let's say, a police station to be interviewed about what happened to them. Again, the message that they're getting from the police station is, have I done something wrong here? So it's really important that we consider the impact of the environments that children are in. They might then be brought to a therapist or might meet with a social worker again. And I suppose what we found was that children were meeting up to 10 professionals and being asked again and again what was happening or what had happened to them. And what we're trying to implement with the Barnahus model is that the child is only asked what happened to them once. And the onus is then on the professionals working at the Barnahus to share the information about what happened to the child between themselves and to make an integrated plan for that child, so that the child is being asked to carry that interagency coordination piece themselves, that's going out, I suppose, to the professionals involved with the child. That's ultimately what we're trying to do in a nutshell. So I like this quote, kind of biased because I wrote it myself, but I suppose it just for me shows the readiness that we have in Ireland around implementation of a Barnahus model, and I really do feel like we've only been ready in the last 5 years to implement that model. So ever since Irish society has acknowledged the existence of child sexual abuse, And just, I suppose, worth noting, child sexual abuse was only acknowledged in Ireland in the 80s. So, you know, I was born in the 80s and I'm very, very young. So it wasn't that long ago. But really, I suppose it's quite a new phenomenon in the legal and policy realm in Ireland. And what we've had is report after report investigating our national responses to child sexual abuse. And each of those reports has had a common theme. And they've been saying that interagency collaboration hasn't been good in Ireland. So we're really, really keen in Ireland that the Barnahus model reflects an interagency model of practice and not another agency for children to have to negotiate. So the need for a collaborative response has been recognised. The piloting of the Barnahus model in Ireland has enabled us to look beyond ourselves, which again has been really important. It's not about looking how can we improve practice in Ireland. It's about looking what's happening internationally. What is good practice? What does the evidence base say? So it's looking outside of ourselves. And we want to acknowledge the trauma that can be caused by the systems within which we work. I think we're at the stage now where we need to hold up our hands and say that we have caused trauma to children as systems, as agencies, as individual professionals a lot of the time, and really acknowledge that, and also acknowledging that there's trauma within our systems, that there are professionals that are carrying a huge amount of trauma, there are systems that are carrying a huge amount of trauma. And we want to aspire to international best practice in our response to child victims of sexual abuse. So there's that bit of kind of taking ownership of our history and acknowledging it, not trying to brush it under the carpet, and working with it and acknowledging that there is still trauma in the system that we're working in, and there are still children being negatively affected by the systems that they're in. And what are we going to do about it, essentially? That's our conference room in the Barnahus there. You'll see that we gather every Tuesday and Friday to discuss cases. Okay, so just to give you a bit of an idea of the timeline, the IDG was established in 2018, so that's the interdepartmental group, and that's the group that sits at government level. And it's a collaboration between the Department of Justice, Department of Children and Department of Health and their respective agencies. And they, I suppose, have committed to a more collaborative response to children who've experienced sexual abuse. And they chose to adopt the Barnahus model in 2018. And the pilot site was decided on and launched in 2019 in the west of Ireland. So we were launched in 2019. It took us a good 12 months to get our referral pathway up and running, and it was essentially our first storming phase. So you've got your storming, norming, performing, performing model there when it comes to collaboration. And the referral pathway was our opportunity to align our policies, practices, legislation of each of the agencies involved. So we have the Gardaí, which is the police force in Ireland. We have Tusla, which is the Child and Family Agency or Social Services. And we have the HSE, which is the Health Service Executive in Ireland. So we're aligning all those policies, practices, protocols under the Irish legislative framework in the context of the Barnahus quality standards. So it took a lot. There was lots of conflict, lots of arguments, but we got there in the end, and we launched our referral pathway in November 2020. And I suppose what happened then the following year was that BNASC was established. So that's the Barnahus National Alignment Steering Committee. So that's the group responsible for national upscaling of Barnahus in Ireland. So they sit under the IDG and they have governance over the 3 regional steering committees for Barnahus in Ireland. So that's Barnahus West, Barnahus East and Barnahus South. Then in 2022, we opened our premises, and I suppose, again, being cautious of language, we don't use the word centre. We don't call it the Barnahus Centre, we call it the Barnahus premises, because it's not all about the centre in Galway. Children throughout the west of Ireland should have the same collaborative response when they've experienced sexual abuse. But you may or may not end up coming to the Barnahus premises for a service. We are the only 24/7 forensic medical service in the country, so lots of children will have to come for their forensic medical examination. However, when it comes to therapy, when it comes to child protection, when it comes to specialist interviewing of children, we will always travel to see a child in their local area rather than bringing them the long journey to the Barnahus premises. And then I suppose I have a pilot evaluation there in 2023, but we've only launched the tender for it in 2023. So we're hoping to commence the evaluation very soon. And we're really, really keen to learn from our experiences of setting up Barnahus in the West, and for that to influence the national upscaling of Barnahus in Ireland. So like I said, Barnahus West was established in the West. So we cover the area in blue there on the map. So Donegal down as far as Limerick. It's a huge geographical area, and we've about 250,000 children living in that area. I suppose what's individual about our area is that we have the islands and we have the Irish-speaking areas, the Gaeltachts, mostly in the west. So we're, I suppose, culturally very diverse. We have children coming in with, I suppose, additional needs when it comes to travel. When we asked the Icelandic Barnahus team how they managed such a large geographical area, because we were kind of struggling with it, they were like, oh, we just take our helicopter. But like, we don't have that option. We don't even have a train to most parts of the west that we cover. And just, I suppose, for context, and again, not dissimilar to Scotland, if you were to drive from the top of Donegal down to the bottom of Limerick, you're looking at about an 8-hour drive. So it's a fairly huge area that we cover from a geographical point of view. So we're based in Galway, just in the centre of that blue bit. Like I said, we have our referral pathway set up. The design of the premises was really key when it came to interagency collaboration, because we had to come together as an interagency group. We have a forensic medical suite, we have therapy spaces, we have our conference room, we have an interview suite. So each of the agencies had to have input into the design of the premises. But what we really wanted, I suppose, from day dot was to have children involved in the design of the Barnahus, and that allowed us really to put in that culture of child participation from a very early stage. So not only were we working collaboratively as an interagency group, we were including children from that point as well. That's been really key. The other area, I suppose, is getting study visits into other Barnahouses, being able to go and see how they work. And I suppose there's no one Barnahus that we say they've got 100% right, that's what we want to be like. But we can learn from each of the Barnahouses that we visit, and really, I suppose, get a lot from those visits as an interagency group. Co-location has been really important, and I suppose I know that, Rachel, you were keen for me to explore this piece as well in a bit more detail, because to my knowledge, we're the only Barnahus across Europe that's co-located also with an adult forensic medical examination service. So basically, the Barnahus in the West shares the same building as the sexual assault treatment unit for all children and young people from cradle to grave. And I suppose we're really lucky, and we consider ourselves really lucky to be working with this really skilled group of professionals, because not only do we have access to paediatricians, to forensic medical examiners, to clinical nurse specialists, we also have access to adult examiners, and we have access to a consultant of infectious diseases. So there's a huge range of expertise in the forensic medical side of the house. I suppose they're the agency that we, as the Barnahus core team, had the most conflict with, because our structures didn't always align, or our values didn't always align, but actually living together has made us figure out how to make it work. So co-location has been really key for us around interagency, working with the medical side of the house. And just something as simple as having the cup of tea together, having the lunch together. We have a shared kitchen. We've had children come in for therapy and they become physically unwell, so we have access directly to a medical service. And then there's children who've come in for a forensic medical examination and they're presenting as acutely suicidal, and they have access immediately then to a mental health professional to respond to that. So that co-location has been really, really key for us and really important for interagency working. And it's really important, I suppose, to note when it comes to interagency working is that we're not about changing the professional identities of the different agencies that we work with, or the professionals that work in those agencies. It's about, I suppose, embracing the diversity of the team that we work with, and finding ways to tweak some of our practices so that we can work better together. Like I mentioned already, we have an interview suite on site as well in the Barnahus, so that allows us to interview children for purposes of forensic interview, and that would be their chief evidence when it comes to any criminal investigation that might occur for that child. So that's a little overview of the Barnahus. So some of the, I suppose, more in detail stuff, that's our therapy room there. It's one of the nicest rooms, I think, in the space, and it's really inviting for children and young people when they come in. But I think what's been really important in getting Barnahus West over the line is having a collaborative interagency governance structure. So Barnahus isn't just about the front line and how we work together at the front line. It's about having an interagency structure at every level. So we have our local working group. So that's the frontline practitioners who come together every month to explore how we're implementing the Barnahus model, how we're doing well, how we're not, what we need to change, and so on. We have a regional steering committee that really steers, I suppose, how we implement the model in the west of Ireland. And then we have our Barnahus group, which is the Barnahus National Alignment Steering Committee, and the IDG, like I mentioned already, the interdepartmental group. So we have interagency working at every single level, and we have Barnahus at every single level because there is that interagency collaboration. So I think it's really been important for us to move away from the idea of Barnahus as a service and move towards it as being a way of working, nearly a way of life for a lot of us. So we have a draft interagency agreement. A lot of the arguments at the time were, well, it's not legislation, it's not policy, what's the point? but actually it's a symbolic agreement between agencies and between the government departments to work together to create a better response for children who've experienced sexual abuse. I mentioned already we have our referral pathway in place, and that's been really key in getting children, just getting them in the front door in a timely way. Interagency case oversight has been really important because, like I said, my job is to make sure the agencies speak to each other and I coordinate the interagency communication and collaboration. It's not my job to direct any agencies and how they do their job and what they should do and so on. I can certainly be curious and ask questions about things and definitely challenge things at times, but it's not my job to direct people around things. There is case oversight from each of the agencies and we work very much together around that. And I think having a key person involved in just making sure everybody gets on and talks to each other and communicates has been really key for us. We have joint specialist interviewing. So we use the word specialist interviewing when we refer to forensic interviewing. So just in case I'm kind of interchanging between the two. So that's when the police and social services are interviewing a child together. So there's usually one social worker and one member of the police interviewing a child together. And that's been really key because it is in itself a microcosm of interagency collaboration. And getting that right has been really, really key for getting the Barnahus model over the line. We have our therapeutic screening pathway, and that's been really important, I suppose, for having a much more individualised response for children. What we found was that there was a huge culture of hearing child sexual abuse and making a blanket referral to a particular service. And actually what we found is that children were very likely to be inappropriately referred for services or accessing multiple interventions. We had children referred to the service who were accessing 4 to 5 different therapies at once, and then other children getting absolutely no therapies. So about coordinating that piece and making sure the response is individualised. A lot of the time we're referring children on to other services in the community for their therapy, and we just don't have the facilities in our Barnahus at present to offer the full therapeutic response. But again, it's making sure that they're on the right list for the right service and that we're not, I suppose, putting children on all the different waiting lists for all the different services. What's also been really key with the therapy pathway is that it's allowed us to identify at the point of recovery where the gaps in the system have been for children. So if there was a huge delay in the interviewing of the child, how that can impact on the child's recovery and how it impacts on their ability to access an early therapeutic intervention can be huge. So it's allowed us to really challenge a lot of those delays that can occur within the system in the best interest of children that we're working with. Having access to advanced training and collaboration with international experts has been really key. What many of you, I'm sure, find is that there's very few experts out there when it comes to interagency work. But finding your network around the world has been really, really important for me. And finding those experts that you can lean on and that you can work with and collaborate with has been hugely important. It's also allowed us to develop a certain amount of expertise within the Barnahus because we're full-time dedicated to this type of work. We use the term trauma-informed practice, and again, like I was saying, language is really important. We don't use trauma-informed models. The model is the Barnahus model. Our practice is trauma-informed. No matter who the professional is that's working with the child at a particular point in time, their practice is always going to be trauma-informed. And that also involves acknowledging that professionals who come to work at Barnahus are more likely than the general population to have experienced abuse themselves. So it's really important that we as a team look after each other and look after ourselves if we're truly implementing a trauma-informed practice. And like I say, evaluation of the pilot is something we're very much looking forward to now. And we're looking forward to that, I suppose, influencing the national scaling of Barnahus in Ireland. So just to give you an idea of figures, we've had 446 children referred to us to date. That's since November 2020. We've had well over 300 interagency team meetings at this stage. And we've completed 234 specialist interviews under the Barnahus model. So unfortunately, that percentage is low. That's only 52% of children referred to Barnahus. That is because we only complete specialist interviews in Ireland if there's going to be a criminal investigation for the child. I suppose something that we're looking to change in the coming years is that more children access a forensic interview, so that we're garnering the details of what happened to the child in a very evidence-based way, and that information is shared in a collaborative way between the agencies involved for the child. But right now, we're only working within the context of the criminal justice system. We've completed 296 forensic medical examinations of children, so that's 66% of children who come through the doors. I suppose what's really important is that about a quarter of the children who come through the doors are less than 34 days post-assault, and in those cases we do prioritise medical examination of the child because of the chance of obtaining healed injuries or obtaining evidence of healed injuries for the child. But for about 3/4 of cases who come through the door, it's children who are more than 34 days post-assault. We'll always prioritise the forensic interview of the child, and they'll have their medical examination after that if it's needed. I suppose that the likelihood of obtaining any evidence of injury is low, but I suppose having that holistic examination of the child has been really, really important. About 3/4 of cases who come for forensic medical examination will identify another health need. That could be anything from a developmental delay, a hearing difficulty, blood disorders. Yeah, you name it, we've identified it, and I suppose having that response for the child has been really important. And like I say, they're getting reassurance as well around their physical well-being. And when we spoke to survivors of child sexual abuse, adult survivors of child sexual abuse, one of the things that was key for them was that they really felt like people could tell by looking at them that they had been sexually abused. And having that medical examination to provide that physical reassurance was really reassuring for them. We've completed 410 psychoeducation and therapeutic screening sessions. So they're not therapy sessions in and of themselves. So what we'll always do for cases when they come in, if they're open to it, is that we'll offer a psychoeducation phone call to the child and family. And we're providing information about the Barnahus, or providing information about trauma, about what to expect, about symptoms, about how these things can impact on children and on families, and how to access information, or how to access information, but also supports if needed. And we're also screening a child and their family around their therapeutic needs. So we're not only looking at what the child might need, but how are the parents doing? And we very often find at this stage is that it's the parents who need support at that point, and actually the child sometimes just wants to be left alone for a while, which is okay too, but it's really important that we're looking individually at what that child might need and what the parents might need and the family and so on. We work collaboratively a lot with family support services at this point as well to make sure that the practical supports are in place for children and families, as well as the therapeutic supports when needed. And we've closed 330 cases to date. So I suppose Barnahus is not a long-term model of practice in Ireland. We're about getting it right at the front door, making sure there's an individualised response, and also not being involved in children's lives forever and ever. Our hope is that children will be able to close the door on this experience in their lives and move on. And I suppose when you're looking at the WHO guidelines and so on, when it comes to child sexual abuse, giving the message that children are more likely than not to fully recover from this is incredibly important. And the expectation out there that they can recover with the right supports is really, really important to give that message. Okay, so just to give you an idea what it looks like for a child when they come through our doors. So imagine day one, the child is making disclosure. Now, this is a very rough timeline. Obviously, every case is different. Some are way shorter than this, some are way longer than this, but this is just a rough idea. So the child will make a disclosure on day one. And on day two, whoever they disclose to will notify either the Gardaí or Tusla, so either, the police or social services. There is a joint working protocol between social services and the police in Ireland. So once the police become aware of a case of child sexual abuse, they must inform Tusla. If Tusla become aware of a case of child abuse, they must inform the Gardaí. So that joint working protocol kicks in very quickly because they are the two statutory agencies involved when it comes to child protection and responses to child sexual abuse. By day 7, we're looking at a referral to Barnahus. Now, we allow a 5-day window from the point of the statutory services becoming involved with the case and then a referral to Barnahus, because we really want to prioritise the immediate safety for the child. So that 5 days allows for the focus to go on whatever that child might need for their immediate safety. We have unfortunately had children who need to be taken into care, or that safety plans really need to be put in place very, very quickly for children. And what we didn't want as a Barnahus was for professionals to get caught up in filling in referral forms to us when they could be out there protecting a child and responding to their immediate needs. And I suppose for some cases as well, children are going to need that acute forensic medical examination. So that's facilitated at that very, very early stage whenever needed for children too. So we'll take in our referral to Barnahus about a week after the child has made their initial disclosure, on average. I suppose by day 10, we'll usually have met as an interagency group. So the MDIA is the multidisciplinary interagency group. And we meet as a group every Tuesday and every Friday. Usually we'll have about a 15-minute slot to discuss a case, because you could have 10 or 12 referrals coming in. And we'll, I suppose, make a plan around what that child might need and prioritise what needs to happen for that child. And then on average by day 15, the child will access their forensic interview. So the child will come to Barnahus. They'll usually be met with by somebody from the police and a social worker, and they'll interview the child together. And then usually quite quickly after that, very often the following day, the child will access the medical examination if it wasn't already completed at that early stage for the child. And I suppose at the end of that investigation phase, by day 17, we are sitting back together as an interagency group and discussing the information that's been gathered, what needs to happen next for the child. And the therapy team are already hearing what the child disclosed during their interview, what happened during the medical examination, what does the child need right now. So you've already commenced the therapeutic screening process before a member of the therapy team has even met with the child. But really from day 20 onwards, you're looking at screening the child around their therapeutic needs, offering an early intervention in-house or referring the child onwards for therapy if that's what's needed in the community. I suppose the blue stars, you might be wondering what they are. That's the points at which there's a direct contact with the child and family. So I suppose it's just to really reflect the amount of work that's going on in the background for the child. So that's that coordination piece is happening in the background, and there's very particular points of contact with the child. Usually, I suppose, by day 3, the expectation is that somebody will have had their eyes on the child at least to make sure that they're safe. That unfortunately can depend on how busy police and social workers are, but that is, I suppose, something that we try to promote as much as possible. Usually within 2 to 3 days of the Barnahus referral, somebody from Barnahus will have made direct contact with the child and family just to explain the process, talk about what's going to happen next, what to expect from us and so on. We have a youth advocate who might get involved with the child as well. So they'll answer any questions that the child has. They'll also bring the child's voice directly to the interagency group. So they'll come and sit in the interagency meeting and say, you know, little Aoife really wants to make sure that you know this, or Aoife wants you to all leave her alone, or whatever. So those direct contacts are really, really important. Obviously, the child will directly be met with at the forensic interview and during medical examination, and whenever possible, we'll get the voice of the child as part of the therapeutic screening process. Just as was a note on therapy, about 20% of children who come through Barnahus can access an early therapeutic intervention with us. It's only a short to medium term intervention. We can't offer long-term interventions to children. When the longer term needs are identified, we'll refer them out to services within their local community. But like I said, that individualised response is really, really important. What has been incredibly useful and important at that point is for children to, or for families to get support and psychoeducation from us, particularly parents. Like I said, a lot of children just want to be left alone at that point, but making sure that parents have the information and you're equipping them, I suppose, with the skills and the reassurance that they, you know, they can support their child through this, and that we will put in supports around them to help them through it. That's been really, really key for recovery for children. So our future plans, national upscaling, like I said, is going to be really important, and Barnahus South, I'm delighted to say, was just launched last week in Ireland. So they're operational now, and they're going to cover the area in yellow on the map there. So the southern kind of coast of Ireland. So we now have Barnahus in the west and the south of Ireland. Barnahus East, I suppose, is going to take quite a bit longer because it does incorporate the Children's Hospital in Ireland. And they also have 3 times the population that we have in the west. So they have about 750,000 children, much bigger team, much bigger service, but smaller geographical area. So there's a lot to contend with to get that over the line. But there's a lot of, I suppose, motivation and work to make that happen. So just a note really around interagency working. Something I always try and keep in my head is that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. As somebody who loves just running with things and getting them done, I can be very impatient. That's a mantra I've tried to really keep in my head, because I can only go so far if I'm doing things on my own. But if we're working together as an interagency group, we can really achieve huge things. And it's been really evident over the last 5 years how possible that is. Like I've said throughout this, interagency working is a key element of the Irish Barnahus model. We're not about creating something new. We're about tweaking our own services in order to be able to work better together. I think it's really important that we challenge all agencies to adapt. If you look at any literature out there when it comes to interagency collaboration, the acceptance of all agencies that they need to make some changes in order to make this work is really important. In the early days, we had a lot of, finally they're coming around to my way of thinking, finally they're going to align with what I'm trying to do here. And actually it's the acceptance from all team members that we all need to make some changes in order to make Barnahus happen. It does enable trauma-informed practices. So I suppose, like I said, not using a trauma-informed model, we're enabling trauma-informed practices across the board. That comes from the very first person who meets the child when they come in. It comes from reception. It comes from the cleaner. It comes from the person who will offer them the cup of tea or the snack. There's so much we can do, you know, as a Barnahus team on the front line, but all the way up to be trauma-informed. Sometimes even acknowledging at them really high levels that it's hard dealing with this stuff, and talking about trauma all the time is hard, and it gets in on you. It's really important that we look after ourselves as professionals, not only frontline professionals, but all the way up through the governance structures. I think for me, obviously I'm biased, but having a key person appointment to dedicate themselves to interagency collaboration has been really, really important. We can't assume it's just going to happen. I think having somebody that takes that on board, who doesn't necessarily give direction to all agencies or all professionals involved with the Barnahus, but they're able to make sure that there's conflict management, that there's embracing of what's in the grey, of the uncertainty of what we're doing, of not getting it right all the time, of making mistakes, but being able to push things on and drive the Barnahus model forward has been really, really key. And I think for me, having a therapy background has been really key around that too, because I suppose having that understanding of how trauma impacts not only on children and families, but on communities and systems as well has been really important. Definition of roles. We heard the American Children's Advocacy Centres talk a lot about staying in your lane, and we definitely have adopted that mantra a lot. But I suppose what comes with staying in your lane is an openness to work with other people in their own lane too. So it's not about just working in your own with your blinkers on, but it's about the ability to work together. I've been working with trauma populations for close to 20 years, and I've yet to meet an expert in all areas of child sexual abuse or trauma. There's a huge amount of experts out there. I think for me, the key to an expert is when they can recognise their own limitations and the own limitations that they have to their own expertise. And then that ability to work collaboratively with other people is really important around that. So that definition of roles has been key, but also in recognising that pull between autonomy versus the structure. So we're trying to put a Barnahus structure in place, so people are going to really want to preserve their own autonomy when it comes to Barnahus and their own professional autonomy. So finding that balance has been really important. And then the ability to sit with multiple truths. So once we have the child at the centre, the child, we want them essentially to be able to recover from what's happened to them. We want to challenge the imbalances in the system. We want to catch the bad guys. We want to make sure therapy is available for children. We want to make sure society is protected from perpetrators of sexual violence. We want to make sure children are protected. We want to make sure siblings are protected. All of those things are true. It's not one or the other, it's and once we're keeping the child at the centre of things, I don't think we can really go too far wrong. But the ability to sit in the grey is something that we've really had to learn in Barnahus West. So our key challenges, staffing, we just don't have enough staff to do all the things we'd like to be able to do. In particular for me, the therapy side of the house, there's so much more we'd be able to offer if we could offer an early therapeutic intervention to all children, or at least the majority of children who come through our doors. Geography is a huge issue for us. Like I say, we cover a large geographical area. Providing an equitable service to children living in the north end of Donegal compared to a child living in Galway City has been a real challenge. And I suppose we're looking at the moment, we're exploring a hub and spoke style approach where we have our Barnahus premises in Galway, but we have almost mini teams throughout the west of Ireland provide that interagency response. There's a myth out there that children have to travel to Barnahus for a Barnahus service, and that's not the case. Barnahus happens wherever that child is. It's not about coming to the Barnahus premises. That's why we don't call it the Barnahus Centre. National upscaling, I suppose it's been a challenge for us in that we're obviously very supportive of it. We want it to happen, we want to influence it, but I suppose the more people involved, the more structures we have in place, the more governance structures in place, the slower things have been to progress. So that's our challenge, is that we need to push on and develop Barnahus in the West, but also work collaboratively with the rest of the country to bring them up to speed on the Barnahus. So that's kind of a dual role that we're playing in our pilot site. Joint specialist interviewing, like I said, that's our microcosm of interagency collaboration, and it's really important to get that right. But that has required adaptations from the police and social services to work together, and that's been really important to work very consciously on. And then the national therapeutic response, there are so many different community services out there providing responses to children, and it ranges. The variation across the region is huge. So it's about providing a certain amount of consistency, having a baseline of consistency, but also, I suppose, not holding back the good quality pockets of interventions that are happening in local areas too. So it's about finding a balance. The education of external stakeholders, making sure that there is a narrative out there that's accurate about the Barnahus has been important. We could have our own whole PR department, and we probably should, because there's a lot of myths out there about what Barnahus does or doesn't do, and there's a lot of assumptions made by people, and getting that message out there has been really key for us. Then cultural shifts. I suppose for me, a learning curve has been recognizing how slow culture is to change, but recognizing that there are tiny things we can always do to shift a culture. It might just be, like I say, the cup of tea that you have with somebody. It's where you sit at the boardroom table. It's who has the most airtime during interagency meetings. It's making sure everybody has a vote in what's happening. It's really living according to your values when it comes to the Barnahus model at all levels of interagency working. Participation has been key, and one thing we've really learned is that, like, we're big on child participation. We really want to hear the voices of children, but if we don't hear the voices of staff, they're not going to hear the voices of children. So making sure everybody feels part of this shift has been really important. And then that communication piece, that communication needs to go up, down, left, right, inside the Barnahus, outside the Barnahus, out to families, out to extended families, out to communities. There's a huge amount that comes from communication. So at the moment, we're working on our national communication strategy when it comes to Barnahus, and making sure that that narrative is put out there in a very accurate way. So my key lessons, finally. Number one is that everything takes longer than you think it will. So just factor that in. The ability to hold more than one truth has been important. So it's not just, okay, we're only about the response to children. Yes, we're absolutely about the response to children, but there are agencies out there who do need to go and investigate crime. They do need to try and catch the bad guys. They do need to try and protect family groups. They do need to gather forensic evidence. You know, there's so much happening just with the Barnahus microcosm, and it's important to, it's not or. You need to really hold that. And then recovery is not just about therapy. Getting that message out to the interagency group has been really key. There's an assumption out there that recovery can't happen until therapy happens for children, but actually recovery starts at the point the child discloses. And it's about how that's heard, how that's responded to by all the agencies involved. And what's the Cara Treisman always says, that you can be therapeutic. Every interaction is an intervention. That's what she says. So we can always be therapeutic, even if you're not a therapist. And working together around that has been key for us. Balancing preparation with action. So preparing well, absolutely. Having strategy, definitely. Having a plan, a clear, transparent plan about what's happening, definitely. But at some point you have to act. And it's only from the action that we're really going to learn, and we're going to learn from our mistakes, and we're never going to have it all right. But if we don't try, we're never going to do it. So it's about having that balance. Like I said earlier on, recognizing expertise and lack of expertise. Knowing that the experts are clear in their limitations, hearing what everybody has to say, recognizing where the expertise is and where they don't lie. And I suppose having comfort in that, I guess. And then just recognizing that trauma affects everything. It affects the people that we work with, it affects the children and families that we work with, it affects all of us as a group. Talking about this today is going to have hopefully some kind of impact on you too. So we're talking about trauma day in, day out. We do have to consider how that impacts on everybody. And I think it's important for a Barnahus manager to really have an awareness around that. So I guess my final message to you all is to remember that culture eats strategy for breakfast, is what they say. So it's all well and good having your plans and so on, but if you're not willing and able to sit, have the cup of tea, hear what somebody has to say, work collaboratively with somebody, really identify your values. Like, what is it that your Barnahus really values, and how do you live that? What does that actually look like? I think it's been really key for us, and just, I suppose, remembering that the culture, I suppose we can all make small changes to implement a Barnahus culture. It's not just waiting until you have the Barnahus framework in place. It's slowly, incrementally implementing a Barnahus model, and that's what's been key for us. So I'd be delighted to hear any questions anyone has. Thank you so much.